You are very special. You're special too.
Hi, everyone. Taylor here with Nuggets in Conversation with Darrell Lerner. This is a conversation I've been waiting for a really long time. And you guys haven't been waiting, guys and gals haven't been waiting for it for a long time because you didn't know it was coming. But we're taking a little unorthodox approach with this one. Darrell, he's known very well in the tech space and the entrepreneurial space. He's a multi-exit founder. He's started a few successful companies. He's always doing the next greatest thing. So definitely you want to keep your eyes on him when you are looking at the trends and what's going to be the big thing. But it's a joy to have him on and to have a conversation with him. And thank you so much for joining us today, Darrell.
Taylor, thank you for having me on. This one's been a long time coming. I think we've been discussing this for like over a year. So let's do it.
Woo! First, we gotta take the approach that everyone doesn't take with you. We gotta talk about sports. We gotta dive in
I
here.
love it. I
Darrell,
love it. It's my favorite podcast ever, and we're 2 minutes in.
you know that I'm a Yankee fan, and I know that you're a Met fan. So let's just go right to where the wounds hurt a little bit. But hindsight might be 2020. You got Juan Soto. Well done. You got him for 15
Thanks.
years, hopefully. Fingers crossed if he doesn't opt out after that fifth year. Or if he does opt out and then the Mets want to pay him the extra, few bucks that he so kindly deserves. But that's where the real question is. What do you think about the Mets deal with Juan Soto? I mean, weighing out everything. I'm definitely not a GM or, sports guru, but you look at his stats and you look at the batting average and obviously his on base percentage, and it's glaringly obvious that you should definitely make the investment. But when you look at the other aspects of the game, like his fielding and his running, what comes to mind? So if you were to put yourself in Cohen's position, what do you think about the decision? What, as a fan, as potentially a GM or manager, talk to me about it.
So since in another world, I would have loved to have been a GM. I think it's a phenomenal move for several reasons. And your points are all valid that yes, not a great fielder, not a great base runner, blah, blah, blah. He's a generational talent, right? He's, I believe, 25, 26. Probably the third best hitter, fourth best hitter in baseball right now, entering his prime. But two key things. First of all, for a franchise like the Mets, getting a guy like Soto, getting him away from the Yankees, beating those other teams for him is transformational. Like, they don't get free agents like that historically, or they've had to overpay veterans at the end of their career. So to be able to get a guy like this, I don't even know if I can remember them ever getting anybody of this magnitude. It just changes the dynamic of the franchise, the perception of the franchise, both to players and to fans. And the other thing is, I mean, yes, obviously all these contracts are outlandish, and paying what you're paying, this is going to be a horrible contract in years 12 through 15. That's always the case. But it's interesting because you look at Bryce Harper, right, who signed a mega deal with Philly. And I think it was an 11 or 12-year deal for 300 and some odd million dollars. And everyone's like, that's an awful contract. And he's already at the point, a few years in, where he wants to renegotiate because suddenly 30 million a year is not a lot to pay for a superstar, right? Like, an average, slightly above average outfielder or back of the rotation starting pitcher is getting 15 to 20 million. So as absurd as it is, whatever Soto's works out to, 50 million-ish a year. Yeah, it'll be a crappy deal in years 12 through 15, but also in years 12 through 15, 50 million a year will not be that significant. And you've seen the same thing happen in the NBA too, where guys will sign contracts. Like the Knicks signed Jalen Brunson. Everyone's like, I can't believe they're paying him $100 million over 4 years or whatever it is. Now that contract is as big a bargain as there is.
They got a coupon there. It was a win-win. I mean, back to your point with the Mets, I don't think that there has been a player like Juan Soto that can actually shift the face of the franchise because, this is actually a trend that we're seeing in sports today, more prominent than ever, is the following of the superstar less than the team, right? Like we see
Yeah.
it with Caitlin Clark and the WM, and when she was in college, and now like the WNBA, and you see it with the Juan Sotos, the Aaron Judges, the Bryce Harpers of the world, even the Tom Brady's. They have a fandom of people that are attracted to them as a person, and I think that's where, as sports teams and just in general brands, look at athletes and people not as like that transactional amount of like, okay, here's the dollar amount. Well, what am I getting with like the on-field stats? It's like, well, there's so much more value beyond that. Okay, like, yeah, he does get caught out. He doesn't make the best base running decisions. He's not going to make the best fielding decisions, but is he going to attract kids, young players, and make them A, love baseball, and then B, love the Mets and want to be a Mets fan? And I think that's where his real value comes in, is like he's the type of player that's going to turn someone that's just flipping channels into a fan, and someone that's going to actually attend games. And I think as sports teams, they grow and they evolve, they also have to shift their thinking into being willing to pay those big contracts. They seem like a lot, but when you really add up the dollars, so what these franchises are making, I mean, if you're paying out close to $800 million, well, you must be getting something big in return. You know what I mean? So
There's a time to step up for franchises, right? And there's a lot of bad deals that are made. This is a time to step up, and the Mets did.
yeah.
Let me ask you, as a Yankee fan, how are you feeling? Are you buying the argument that Max Fried plus Paul Goldschmidt plus what's the closer's name? Devin Williams
Yeah.
plus Clay Bellinger equal Juan Soto?
Yeah, I'm no, I don't buy that bullshit. I haven't bought the bullshit that the Yankees management has been telling us since the boss.
I was going to say
Really.
since George died,
Yeah,
it's a different mentality.
it really is. And honestly, it's almost like a mentality of like, we're not going to take accountability for all the F ups we've been making in terms of trade deals and just like contractual, like structuring contracts, and who, like, are we building up our farm team? Are we trading guys away? What the heck's going on? Like, we can't be doing both at the same time. You're not going to be able to build sustainably for the long run. And then it comes into question, is like, is Cashman like run his route? Is at the end of him? I mean, he's been the GM for forever. Is he just not with the times and not willing to make the shifts? Or is it coming from ownership? Is it Hal and the Steinbrenners, just not the gritty Steinbrenners where they're coming into your ball club and they're going to fire your ass because you didn't perform, and that's it. Like, Boone's not going to have a chance to come up on the conference and say, oh, the guys, they played really hard and we just messed up, mental error. What kind of shit is that?
I think it's both. I think it really is both. And it brings up an interesting question. And I've always said this to people, like, what is the actual objective or primary goal of owning a sports team? Is it to make money? Is it to build a sustainable winner? Is it to build a sustainable contender? Is it to win a championship at all costs? And I don't know that there's a right answer to that. It feels like the Yankees' goal is to be consistently decent while being somewhat cost conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's just a really interesting thing. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, I'd say, yeah, I'd love to win a championship every year while being budget conscious, but that's not feasible. But then you look at teams like the Marlins, who have won a couple of titles and then go into hibernation for 10 years and are the worst team in baseball. Is that worth it? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that actually brings up a really interesting question, is that you can approach a specific thing in a million different ways, right? There's all of the owners in sports, I'm sure they all have varying reasons as to why they're the owners or why they decided to start the sports club. And it's the same thing in, like, going back to something that we're both familiar with in like entrepreneurship, is you can have a why for starting a company, and it's going to differ from the person next to you and maybe even the people on your team. But how are you able to link in in the present moment on a common goal and get the buy-in for, that specific moment to achieve the goal and then, move on from there. But also being accepting that, everyone doesn't come from the same backgrounds or thoughts or perspectives or North Star or compass, or even have that to even know kind of what direction they should be going in. So that actually pivoting into that, I do want to talk about entrepreneurship a little bit and being unorthodox, since we took an orthodox approach to the conversation, kind of touching on sports a little bit. But I really want to take it back to like some of your earliest memories, like as a young kid. What was your upbringing like, and like your family life like, and how did that either like help or challenge you to honestly do everything else that you've done throughout your career and like starting a company? Was it helpful? I mean, so many people come from different backgrounds and they can look at, the experiences they've had on their life with light or with hate, and like with lessons or not. So what was your like childhood like, and how did that really shape kind of your mentality and the person that you were right before you started doing all these successful things?
I love that question. My upbringing grew up in a fairly affluent Long Island community.
New York.
Uh, Long Island, a lifelong New Yorker. My dad was, I guess, what you would call an entrepreneur back in the day.
Wow.
Started some companies. Nowadays, like anybody can be an entrepreneur, anybody can start a side hustle. Back in whenever he was getting started in, the 1960s, 1970s, that wasn't really the same thing.
Rare.
But he always had an entrepreneurial streak to him. So I think that was imparted upon me.
I
He
have a question
also,
though. Did you recognize that at a young age? Or is hindsight 2020 and like looking back at like your dad's career, you're now like, oh, he was an entrepreneur? Like, was that an awareness that you had while you were a young boy and like growing up?
I don't think so. I mean, that's actually a really interesting question. I don't think I perceived him as an entrepreneur. I mean, I certainly perceived that he was, a businessman and he did a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of different things and had companies. But like I always had an entrepreneurial streak myself. So I
Yeah.
think probably as I got older, I'm happy to dive into a couple of my
Yeah.
childhood
I
endeavors.
want what I want to know, what are the oddest things you've ever done
I
as an
have a good,
entrepreneur? We all have those weird cringe stories that we're like, ooh.
I have a couple good ones. Beyond the stereotypical starting a lemonade stand, when you're 6 years old. Um, but just to close the loop on that, yeah, my dad, I think probably as I got into my 20s and then more as I got older is when I really connected the two. Uh, but because I guess I did always have that entrepreneurial streak.
Yeah.
Um, and my grandfather also, he started companies. He was fairly prominent on Wall Street.
Wow.
So, I mean, I always perceived him as like an old world businessman. But again, kind of looking back, I can see that he had an entrepreneurial streak too. Same point as Bob. Like, I didn't connect the dots
Mhm.
when I was younger. Like, I don't think those are the things that made me an entrepreneur. I think it was it was in my blood. I
Yeah.
think it's an interesting question for a lot of people, like, are entrepreneurs born or made?
Mhm.
I think for me, it was always in my blood. I watched like the movie Wall Street, and that would get me like so, jacked up for wanting to go into business and take over the world and carry a briefcase and make deals. And so, I always kind of had that. But I'm sure it didn't hurt that from with my dad and with my grandfather, like I was exposed to business and business at a fairly high level from a young age and got to see, some pretty cool successes and some failures and tough times. My dad had, the strong, never quit persistence mentality is it was as mentally tough as anybody I've ever met in my life. So I think that also helped shape me to be able to deal with adversity. And quite frankly, I just kind of reflexively balk at anybody who tells me what to do. So I don't think I was ever cut out to work for anybody else.
I love that. It's an interesting concept, you say, when you're born, or can you be made an entrepreneur? But I think when you look at, especially as like childhoods, right? And just like of everyone, the question of nurture versus nature and the role that
Yeah.
environment plays. And even as a kid, whether you recognize really what your parents are doing or not, and honestly, like candidly, what kid really does completely understand what their parents do, or what's really the world around them, until they become older, and hindsight's 2020. But when you look back at that, it's almost like, whether you realize it or not, it's the environment that they created for you allowed your entrepreneurial spirit to flourish, because they could have
Yes.
easily diminished your ideas. I mean, I'm sure you've hung on their coattails a million times, like, Dad, like, listen to this idea. And he could have easily been like, Dad, shut up, go read a book, or go outside and go play,
Go become
but
a doctor.
go be the lawyer. Let's go into that. You know what I mean? Like, all those little crevices, but it's those opportunities and those moments of, like, if you didn't have those, the set of parents, and like your mother being in education and being a teacher, and actually like being that grace and that guidance for you in a different spectrum, because she's working almost like a 9 to 5, whereas like an entrepreneur person, they don't really understand 9 to 5. There's no constraints when you're an entrepreneur. You're just always doing work, and you don't know really life outside of not doing work. So it's like that odd balance. But I do want you, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's a really good point, and I probably take for granted the fact that my desire to be an entrepreneur and not work for anybody else and was, well, I don't want to say that not work for everybody else was like encouraged, but I was given the freedom and support to pursue a path that I wanted to pursue, and I didn't have, conservative parents who were like, no, you need to go the corporate life or whatever. So, and I think also they saw me, and I'm happy to dive into a few of these examples if you want, but they saw me as a young age, like having an entrepreneurial streak.
Yes, give me a couple stories of like your first, beyond the lemonade stand,
And
but
you're
like
on the
your first
lemonade stand.
endeavors.
All right, I'm gonna give you four. Two
Yes.
are kind of less interesting, and two are a little more risque. Uh, I always liked travel. So when I was young, I fancied myself as a travel agent.
What?
And
What are we talking? Young, like high school Darrell, or like what?
no, more like 10, 11, 12. And by being a travel agent, it meant that I would order like brochures from hotels and cruise lines, whatever. I just kind of display them in a room in the house. And I think I may have had like one of my parents' friends let me book a flight for them. That was about the extent of that business.
Hey, you got
Um,
your first transaction at 10. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Made a profit.
Also, ticket reselling. I remember one of someone I knew wanted to go to a concert, and I knew there were ticket brokers, and
Oh my
negotiated
God.
a transaction where, I mean, this sounds crazy, but I'm dating myself, how old I am, but like
Hey,
tickets for a big concert you could buy on the secondary market for $30, and I marked them up to 40. Um, Made the
killer.
difference.
What a margin.
Um, but I mean, one of the most interesting ones or most fun ones, when I went to sleepaway camp, we didn't have a canteen. We had what they called candy days. So twice a week, you could go and pick something from the candy thing,
Hmm.
and you had to give a ticket. They gave you a bunch, your like one of those old carnival tickets.
Hmm.
And I remember the
Dang.
second, after the first year, I remember going, our elementary school had literally like a carnival day with the same kind of tickets, right? So I remember kind of the light bulb went off. I'm like, these would come in very handy over the summer. And I obtained a shit ton of them
Let's
and
go.
took them up to camp with me and started trading them. I would use them for extra candy days, or I asked my parents visiting day to bring me, if you remember those like instant soups, like cup of noodles,
Yes.
those were popular. I would trade those for candy days. So I got into this whole deal where I was like, somehow I would end up with like 20 candy days per week
You were
between the
the
extra
candy plug.
tickets. I was. I
Holy.
was.
And
So that
you
was
know, that's actually the story, that how you kind of the light bulb went off when you went to the carnival, saw the tickets, but then related it to the candy. I feel like that's a lot of the most successful entrepreneurial stories, right? I guess from people that haven't founded ultra successful companies, it's almost like, oh, you need to create the newest, best thing ever. And often some of the best ideas are just applying one thing from one industry, tweaking it a little bit and applying it to a new circumstance and a new experience. And I feel like that's almost exactly what you did in that moment. And how did that translate then, into your other endeavors and like what, but when you really look back on those experiences, what did you like really learn from those early starts that maybe helped you do the big things or take the bigger risks later on?
I think I just learned that I loved kind of wheeling and dealing
Mm.
and spotting opportunity. And I knew it was in my blood. I knew that I wanted to make shit happen. I knew I didn't want to work for anybody else. I knew I always had ideas. Obviously, there's a lot of lessons that you learn from actually being in the trenches that you can't get before you start doing it. But I always knew that I wanted to have my own business. And I think, by the way, you bring up a great point. I always tell people it's not the idea, it's the execution. And yeah, 'cause people always say, I have a phenomenal idea. They want you to sign an NDA. There's a great Paul Graham from Y Combinator has a series of essays going back like 10, 12 years. And I remember one particular essay, he's like, everyone says they have great ideas. And he's like, so I always challenge them with this. If you think your idea is so great, go ahead and try to sell it. Because you can't. He's like, startup ideas inherently have zero value because there's no marketplace to buy or sell them. And anything that has value, there's a marketplace to buy or sell, which means ideas in and of themselves are worthless. And I also, I say to people like, you look at the biggest companies in the world right now, NVIDIA aside, but what does Amazon fundamentally do? Or what did they do, several years ago? They sell a bunch of stuff. They sell everything. I mean, the execution was incredible, right? They built their own shipping and logistics system and Prime and all that. But at the core of Amazon, it's not some like mind-blowing idea. It's a site where you can go buy things, buy pretty much anything, right?
And
Google started out.
to your point though, and it's reliable, it's consistent, it's what you're getting with the Amazon. You're
Yes,
not getting a rocket ship to your door. You could, but you're not, to your
probably
point.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, Google, right? Google started out as a search engine. What made Google different from, again, dating myself, Yahoo, InfoSeek, Lycos, Excite, all the other ones that started in that time period, right? They executed at a really high level and then went on to build, whether it was AdWords or AdSense or all of the other things that ultimately have become part of Google. But those initial concepts were nothing earth-shattering. It wasn't, this third derivative of the Uber for X. They took existing concepts, put a bit of a fresh take on it, and executed flawlessly.
And remained in the game, I think too, is
Yes.
a huge concept. And it's also an interesting topic of when do you know when to remain in the game and not? And then when do you know when to pivot off of that strategy? Or is it the time to abort the ship? Is it, do you get a new ship and keep traveling or just, completely scrap it all and, pull a kayak out,
I think I think there's two interesting points on there. First of all, I think my favorite quote from my all-time favorite book on entrepreneurship, which is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz from
Mm-hmm.
Andreessen Horowitz fame, is what I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. When I ask the most famous CEOs, or like when I ask successful CEOs how they did it, they all point to some game-changing idea and some stroke of genius they have. When I ask the ultra successful CEOs how they did it, they all say one simple thing: I didn't quit. And that always stuck with me because this is a game where it's like you just got to take as many shots as possible, as many swings at the plate, go back to our baseball analogy, before the money runs out. And then in terms of knowing when to quit, when to pivot, in my opinion, it's as much art as science. I believe I come from an environment of test heavily, test often. I'd say my motto is test, learn, iterate, and double
Mm.
down on what's working. But yeah, every company I've started, there's been a general vision or a general industry, but a year later, 2 years later, they didn't look like anything I intended. That's why I think business plans in general are bullshit, unless you're kind of just starting out and you want to demonstrate that you have some command over an industry. It's basically just like have a general idea, be willing to make some bets, get in there, start building. More importantly, start testing, start getting your product in front of users, getting feedback, looking for those nuggets of feedback within those golden nuggets of information. And sometimes those aren't easy to find. Like you have to read between the lines.
They're not
To
glaring.
no, I mean, I always encourage people to talk to a ton of customers, but they're not going to necessarily be like, oh, I love the vanilla flavor of your product. It's more, I'll give you an example. So my first startup was a dating company, dating app, and the whole story there, but we ended up pivoting to building on top of Facebook. This is my brother and I back in 2007.
You started a company
And
with your brother. We have to put a pin in that. Little
we can do that.
unorthodox there. A lot of
We can do
controversial
that.
information regarding starting companies with your family, but anyways.
That's an interesting one. So we we read all of the customer emails, and there were a couple that stuck out. Like so that app was called Are You Interested? It was basically very simple because that's what worked on Facebook at the time. Are you interested? Yes, no, skip. And we got a couple emails from people saying, I matched with a friend of mine, a colleague, whatever, classmate of mine. Turns out we both liked each other all along, but we were never, we were too scared to tell each other.
What?
And these are just, two out of 1,000 emails. But we kind of saw that there was like this golden opportunity there to introduce a friends of friends feature to kind of lean more into connecting people that you might otherwise have not been able that or are within your network. And yes, that's a lot of where we pivoted the product to over this second and third year. And it was just from kind of gleaning those pieces, those nuggets out of those emails. Like I said, they weren't in spotlight, in blinking lights, staring you in the face. You know, most of those were negative customer emails. Why do I have to pay for this? Blah, blah, blah. So, you do have to dig a little bit, and you're looking, at least in my opinion, you're looking for people using your product in ways that you didn't expect them to, or it wasn't intended for. And if you see people using it in that kind of way, there might be something there. That's something that you probably want to really dig into. And we've seen that time and time again. Like even another example is like why if people are using your product early and their friends, their acquaintances, when the kind of the I'm doing you a favor phase is out, but they're still logging in. Like, what are they doing on there exactly that's causing them to log in? Like, look at that, when they don't need to be using it, but they are. What features are they using? Like, what's keeping them there? That's giving you a signal. And those are the signals I think you look for early that tell you, because you are going to generally pivot, that tells you where to lean in and where you might have something that you didn't realize you had.
I love that. That's a huge piece of advice. I think often where as you're building the company, you have this vision, this mission, this business plan, right? And this is your Bible, this is your document, and you're going down to the depth with this. And I've seen so many disasters happen that way. And like it's the ability to pivot. And honestly, the courage to know that every product, first of all, starts off shitty. Okay. And it's
Yes.
only until user feedback and iteration does it go anywhere. I mean, you can look at the earliest days of every single product and it was bad. I could guarantee you that compared to what it is now. But just having that awareness of what are the signals or the things that you should be looking for as you're building and as you're pivoting. If you weren't, really diving into those emails, you would have never thought to introduce that friends of friends feature, which ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong, changed the trajectory of where the company was going. And that was
Yeah.
just by leaning into a piece of feedback.
And there was even a bigger pivot that caused us to build on top of Facebook that I'll touch upon briefly. We started out with, this was an online dating site. It was called IamFreeTonight.com, date by your schedule. There was a wingman feature, right? That was our vision.
Whew.
Facebook opens up their app platform. This is spring 2007, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, this was actually pretty revolutionary. The idea of being able to go into a large social networking site,
Oh, yeah.
tap into their users for free. And we just kind of said, like, wow, this feels too good to be true. We have to check this out. And we built an app whose primary purpose was to drive traffic to the dating site. And we just saw there was a life-changing opportunity, pivoted on a dime to building on top of Facebook, never touched the original dating app again. But it goes to your point. You have, like, every successful founder has a bit of an ego. It's hard to do this if you don't have a bit of an ego because you're betting on yourself. You think you're smart. A lot of people think they're smarter than anybody else.
Right.
And right, you think you can do this. You think you can succeed in an industry where inherently 90+% fail. So it's a tough balance because you have to be able to put that aside and instead of, as you were saying, being like, this is my business plan. I'm going to make it work no matter what. I don't care. If a user doesn't like it, that's their problem. Your goal isn't to be proven right. Your goal is to win. Your goal is to build a company that succeeds and thrives and makes money or gets users or whatever your goals are. And that can't happen if you're just so deeply wedded to a concept that you ignore all signs that it's not working. And I think to me, that's the downfall of a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And you mentioned something critical. And I think the word balance, because I think it applies to more than just, the balancing of user feedback. Even when we talk about something as granular as user feedback in developing a product, right? If you just completely are guided by the user feedback, well, that might definitely not be the right direction either. So
Correct.
just like I think that's a huge thing in like life and what you're trying to do with yourself and your goals. Back to this sports team. What is your goal for having a sports team? What is your goal for building a product? Why even start the company? Like what let's get there first and then reverse engineer and peel back the layers from the why, from the true North Star. And then, everything else will kind of lay itself out there. And 100%. I don't know a founder that's not egotistical, but the best founders that I know are the most humble, egotistical people I know. They're willing to put the bet on themselves, but not it's for a greater good. It's for something bigger than themselves. In many cases that I've seen. So you could definitely speak on that more in some of the smartest rooms you've been a part of. What does that look like? Is there a correct formula? Like I am 50% ego and 50%, like is there a specific way to conduct yourself in building successful companies, or have you seen all different kinds of paths?
It's a really interesting question. In terms of the most successful founders I've seen and been around and rooms I've been in, I would say I have seen all kinds. I think usually there's some common factors. I think the best founders they have an insatiable desire to learn. They are deeply curious. Uh, there's that old expression like strong opinions loosely held. And so they're willing to listen to feedback. And to your earlier point, which is a great one, it's not getting customer feedback and then just doing everything the customers say. as the old Henry Ford quote goes, if I listened to my customers, I would have built a faster horse. So, right, it's being able to kind of take in all of this feedback, synthesize it, as I said before, look for the nuggets, but also figure out, what people are saying, it's not just giving them what they want, because a lot of times if you give people what they want, the absence of that is not stopping them from using your product. Like people might be like, oh, I'd really like dark mode on this app. Like I'm sure you would, but that's a nice to have. It's not stopping you from using the product. And it's really kind of digging in and figuring out what are the things that are stopping somebody from using it or driving them away or, affecting your ability to get new users. And just to circle back to your question, yeah, I mean, I really think I have seen all kinds and they run the gamut. But, for instance, right now I'm in a community called Post-Exit Founders, and it's made up of roughly now 3,000 literally post-exit founders who have had a meaningful financial exit or one or more. And I've had calls with this point, probably well over 100. I've met many more at meetups. And by the way, this is a group, and I say this humbly, but there's a lot of household names in there, people who have founded companies that whoever is listening has heard of, used, complete household names. There's some billionaires in that group. And out of those 100 calls, I mean, again, I'll qualify it with, it's like, being in a fraternity. If you're in the group, people are going to react differently. They're going to automatically accept you. But on these calls, the overwhelming majority of them are just incredibly humble, nice, curious. These are not, I mean, obviously, these are people who are entitled to have the biggest egos in the world, and they probably do when it comes to certain things. But on these calls, you would not know that you're talking to someone who created a $500 million company or a $2 billion company, but for the fact that they're incredibly smart and and it's so different. As somebody who spent a lot of time on Twitter and LinkedIn, and in that world the last couple of years, people beating their chest over I made $40,000 last month, and it's in such stark contrast. And you'll have this call with this person who sold their company for $2 billion, and they're not bragging at all.
It's interesting that you say that. I guess that's where the phrase literally "don't judge a book by its cover" comes from, because I swear the most successful people that I know, and I don't equate success just to like monetary figures. I think success for me is your ability to be as free as you want. So you could just do what you want and whatever that means to you. And some of the people, I mean, we're talking about billionaires here, and you look at them and you would not pick them off a line that they started a company or anything like it, because they do not look like it, whether it's in their actions or it's in their appearance. And that's why it's so important that you as as an early founder, or as someone encountering like a new industry or a new products or something, you just completely try to remove your ego, remove your judgment, and go in with just a clean slate of open-mindedness, and almost like, I'm here to learn. Back to your point of what are some of the indicators for these ultra successful people, is it's almost like an obsession with learning, sometimes to a fault, where they're almost like information overload, and then they're just like a silo in their own island because they really can't talk to anyone else because they know a million topics and no one can interact with them. So it goes back to the balance point of like, there's a spectrum of being curious as well, right?
There is. And it reminds me, like, probably one other factor that I attribute, or quality that I attribute to some of the best founders. It sort of goes hand in hand with this insatiable curiosity, but they're always trying to grow as a person. They're always trying to learn, whether it's books, podcasts, taking up a new hobby, like personal growth and growing as a person, being a better version of themselves constantly. That's a big one.
Yeah, that's another thing I've noticed too. I mean, there's a few indicators that you look at if that's the path you want to mimic or follow. You can look at these different stars and KPIs and almost guide your boat along the path that, others have also followed. I know we touched on this earlier, you starting a company with your brother. There's so much advice and all these gurus out there from, the universities that literally have courses where you're paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to the personal brandy gurus that we have on the digital sphere of the, digital university that we all,
My
operate in.
favorites.
Yeah, those are interesting. Pay me 30,000, I'll show you how to make 100,000, after whatever. So a lot of misconceptions there, but bringing it back to starting a company and, deciding firstly, what you're even going to begin to build. But I feel like who you build with is even almost more important, whether that's yourself or others. And, ultimately you could be a solo founder, but you're never really a solo founder. At some point you're getting someone involved, whether it's a graphic designer, an artist or something. So when for people that have the nugget in their head, don't start companies with your family, keep family and business separate. From your experience, how do you navigate those waters to save your family relationships, operate the business successfully? And yeah, just some advice, because I want to knock back those people where there's just like a general statement, don't do business with family. Well, who's your family? Are they cool? Like let's unpack that a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, so can you touch on that?
Absolutely. So in terms of finding a co-founder or not finding a co-founder, first of all, when it comes to working with family, I have my mom in my back ear, but she would always say, "Don't hire someone you can't fire," and which is a strong argument for not working with family and friends or relationships that, I mean, business relationships can become friendly. It's a lot harder
Mm.
for friends to go into business relationships because then it can destroy it.
Hmm.
With that said, I mean, I have founded two companies with my brother. Finding a co-founder or working with a co-founder, to me, it's very similar to a marriage or a serious relationship. You're essentially dating each other or in a relationship together. It's just a work relationship.
100%.
And can it work with family? Absolutely. Uh, some of
How?
the best. So I guess, my advice for working with family is probably not any different than it would be for working with another co-founder. The same principles apply. You just have to make sure you're aligned and you do these things. I think the
Mm.
biggest area that founders break up or run into problems is they don't well, two things. One, they don't properly set expectations, or three things. Two, they don't define roles and responsibilities. And three, they're not necessarily aligned on key matters, on
Mm.
how much, stuff that sounds simple, like, are you willing to work on weekends? How hard are you willing to work? You know, will you go the extra mile? How much quote unquote work-life balance? And I'm not judging anybody, but if one founder is like, I will do whatever the F it takes, even if it means, working all weekend, and another is like, work-life balance is very important to me, and I'm just not taking calls at 7 o'clock or on weekends unless it's an emergency. Unless you go into it knowing that beforehand, and most people don't, that's going to create a ton of tension. So
Mm.
that's where I think a lot of people don't, especially young entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs, they'll just, whether they meet someone or they know someone, and like, hey, it'd be great to start a business together, right? And then you kind of, just like a relationship, like once the honeymoon phase is over, and suddenly, the bills are piling up, or, the kids are screaming, or stop using relationship metaphors. But it's, you get down in the trend, right? You run into these problems. And as I said, like, with one person, if there's not alignment around how hard you're willing to work, around how much are you willing to bend the rule, like where's your moral compass, what are your ethics? Maybe one person's willing to lie, steal, and cheat and another isn't. how do you feel about money? If one is too conservative, or, I mean, not that this is too conservative, but one's a lot more conservative than the other when it comes to spending money, when it comes to risk,
Mm.
right? These are all things, if you know them in advance, great, and you're aligned. But if you don't, and these come up in the ordinary course of business, resentment builds, frustration builds, and that's where these relationships fall apart. So I don't really think it's any different from family. The biggest issue with family is obviously if a family co-founder relationship breaks up, that's catastrophic.
Yeah.
That's
The
a
ripple
nuclear bomb
effects.
going off, right?
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's why it's much more important to get those things right with family, and because you're going to have conflicts in business, and it's like, aside from being aligned to all these things, can you resolve them? Do you have a communication style where you can resolve conflicts in a constructive way versus grudges and resentments building up?
Yeah.
Again, with family, I think it's even more important.
And I even think, sorry to interrupt, but I think just
That's okay.
taking if you take what you just said, you hit the nail on the head, relationships. You take the construct of entrepreneurship, co-founders, teams away, relationships with ourselves, with others, whether it's users, co-founders, team members, friends, a stranger, that's like humanity. And I feel like a lot of the things that I'm hearing too and that you're surfacing is these almost like universal values and truths that just become more weighted based on whatever the context is. And I don't know any successful partnership that doesn't base itself on communication, accountability, respect, all of the things, that it would take to build a successful company, whether it's your family member or not. I just think obviously having family can make it a little more complicated because now I actually see what you're doing. You're telling me you're going to work on the weekends. Well, I see that you're not. You know what I mean? Whereas a co-founder that says that, it might take 6 months for you to figure out oh shit, they're not delivering on anything they said. And that's where it's choose your co-founders wisely. But the same principle is, occurring.
Absolutely. And you just reminded me of something really important. One of the, obviously, to do this right, you need to know analytics, products, sales, whatever. One of the most underrated skills for, I was going to say any founder, but really for anybody in life, it's something that I learned a few years into my career, is the ability to communicate effectively and have difficult conversations. Because most people, whether in business or in life, don't know how to do that and can't do that. And for me, it happened after the first time I had to fire somebody. They were shocked, and I felt like an asshole. And I realized I never properly delivered feedback to them to let them know just how unhappy I had been. And I'll just say I don't want to even, lead on who it was. They were smart. It wasn't that they were bad at their job. They just weren't that interested in, had interest in other areas. And that carried forward. They were a little toxic to the team. And I never properly communicated it because I wasn't experienced enough at having difficult conversations. And so after that happened, I swore that I would never let that happen again. And I remember we fired someone a year or so later, a fairly high level role. And we had several, it didn't work out. He was a fish out of water in the role we put him in. That's on us. But we had several, tough conversations. And I remember when we ultimately had to let him go, he walked into the conference room. I was with our HR person, and he kind of looked at us and was like, all right, let's get it over with. And inside, I smiled a bit, obviously not at the fact that we had to terminate someone's employment, but just that I had succeeded in delivering the feedback I needed to. So there was zero surprise on his part. And for anybody listening, there's a ton of books on this. One of my favorites, the first one I recommend, is a book called Crucial Conversations. Very simple, straightforward book. And I've recommended this to so many people for so many different reasons. And you'll read it and be like, all right, duh, this is Mickey Mouse stuff. And then you realize that most people don't actually do this. Like, basically tells you avoid being passive aggressive.
Mm,
And I don't know how far we want to go into this, but the premise of it is when you're having a difficult conversation, ask yourself, what do I want for myself? What do I want for the other person? What do I want for the relationship? And have that conversation.
mm,
And again, it sounds simple and straightforward, but it rarely happens, especially with people who aren't trained that way, because usually when you're having a tough conversation, you immediately devolve into, well, you did this and you did this and you said this. People get, or they make passive aggressive comments and it causes people to get defensive. And if you can't have people need to feel safe in a conversation to have a productive conversation.
mm,
So once you start doing that, you lose safety, conversation goes to shit.
mhm.
So the whole premise is ask yourself those questions beforehand, have that conversation where you're trying to get a particular outcome rather than win the fight. That's the short version, anyway.
I feel like some of the biggest unlocks specifically that we've talked about in this conversation are almost like the simplest. It goes back to the idea. Go ahead, tell me your $1 million idea, but like, are you going to do it? It's like, even this, like, yeah, I'm going to tell you the framework for how to have tough conversations, like XYZ. Think about these three questions. Make sure you actually think about it, like give it more than 20-second thought. And then you're going to be well more prepared than if you were to just like walk in and be like, hey, the XY, this is why, this is why. I mean, again, it goes back to what kind of environment are you creating? What are you looking for out of it? Again, we keep bringing this up as like, what are you looking for? What is the goal? What is the why of what's occurring? And is again pointing the finger back at yourself. How can you, be better in that situation and then for the future? And kudos to you for like you realizing and being aware of the first instance that you had to experience something and then being having that hindsight 2020 and saying I'm not going to allow someone to feel like that again. I'm going to take it upon myself, learn what I need to so to reconcile that. And it's touching on an interesting kind of point that I wanted to go into is some of the biggest like things that you've learned. What like you didn't know them going into the experience. Like, I feel like in today's day and age, we're always trying to be so over prepared. It's like, I didn't read 100 books, so I can't start yet. I didn't take the class. When you look back at some of the times where you were least prepared, what were like those times? But like, what was the shift of, okay, you just took the leap, you weren't prepared, but that leap and that like not being prepared actually gave you a lesson and helped you learn and move you forward.
Yeah, good question. So, biggest things I learned, and I will caveat this with some lessons can't be taught. They have to be learned through experience. And of
Mm.
course, good entrepreneurs are willing to learn and take that feedback and do better next time. I would say, some key things I learned, you know, try to be the best of the world in the world at one thing.
Mm.
I think early in my career, there was this desire to chase, do everything, right? Do this, do all the features, all the things, and chase every partnership.
Mm.
And you realize that the most successful companies they get known for, or at least early, they do one thing really well.
How do you
Um,
find your one thing?
I think it's kind of going back to what's working. Like why are people using, I mean, like sometimes it's obvious when you have product market fit, but
Mhm.
others it's, again, looking for those nuggets. Why are people using your product? Why are they using a particular feature more than you intended them to use it? Are they asking, again, I generally come from the app world, so or website world, right? So building consumer products. Are they asking for sharing features
Mm.
before you've built them or made them prominent? Do users want to actually share your product? Do you have true fans? And then kind of really diving into like what they're loving about your product and doubling down on that.
Mm. I love that.
Um, and
That's huge.
another this is an important one. It kind of goes to be the best in the world, one thing, but it's don't chase shiny objects. Uh,
Mm.
I can think
Especially
back and
today in a world of vanity metrics, Darrell, you know, the blue check mark. If you don't have the blue check mark, you're off the radar. Well, caveat, we're friends. I don't have a blue check mark. You know what I mean? So
I made a rare exception in your case because I only deal with blue check marks. Ah, kidding.
that's your
Um,
KPI for being a friend.
I can think of early in my career, even certainly happened with Snap Interactive, which was our dating company. It even happened a bit with All Pause, chasing partnerships. We had a partnership with a celebrity. I remember even going back before we had pivoted to Facebook with I Am Free Tonight. Ben Affleck's team reached out. They wanted a dating site to appear in a movie.
What?
And we thought, holy shit, that sounds so cool. So we
Yeah.
put everything aside for weeks to build
Mm.
this white label version to fit the movie. And finally, we learned the movie ended up going straight to, DVD or those days VCR. We had a partnership where we were giving away Rob Thomas tickets. This is with I'm Free Tonight, to a couple in every city. Uh, and I have multiple examples of that. It's so easy to get caught up in, this huge company wants to work with me, this celebrity wants to work with me. And I'm not saying every time, but much more often than not, it ends up being such a time suck. And it's only through seeing that I tend to now turn down those opportunities, not look for them. And I
Now
always
you
tell people,
now I you gotta tell me then. How do you know then when again when you should hop on the ship or when the ship like because I mean the movie thing that sounded like it would be a good fit. I mean, ish, if you didn't have to like completely put everything else aside, but like how do you know? Like, or do you not really know? And that's like the whole game, you never really
so
know.
part of it comes with experience. I mean, I have 4 or 5 examples like that where I can look back in my past and be like, every time I went after, whether it was the partnership with the celebrity or the partnership with the billion-dollar company, it ended up not really doing anything.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess there's two things I would say. One, if possible, get a mentor slash advisor who's been where you're trying to go and can help you navigate that. The other is, and this is always my test, it's good to kind of step back and ask yourself, what are the 1, 2, 3 things that absolutely have to happen in the next 6 months, for instance, to drive the business forward? Like for me to get to where I want to go, what has to happen over the next 6 months? And then kind of look at everything through that lens. And does, you know, celebrity partnership, company partnership, whatever, are they guaranteed to get you where you want to go?
Mm.
And the answer is usually no. The answer is usually, well, if everything worked out, it could maybe do this. And
Right.
and looking,
That actually I want to go into this, and you mentioned the advising aspect of things, and because you've had so much success in all of the things that you've done, I know you're very big on giving back, and that's a huge thing about you. You're the knowledge that you have and the experiences that you have, you're not afraid to share all of the wins, obviously, but also all of the shit that's happened, and like, hey, this is where it's been bad for me. Maybe, be cautious about this, going on into the future. So talking about like advising in that sense, where do you see yourself like now and like giving advice for, like, do you give advice? Like, how do you operate that? Because I feel like so many people can learn from like you as a mentor, you as a person, you as, beyond the entrepreneurial spirit. So how do you look at kind of that transition in your career from like also the builder, because you're still involved in a lot of projects and still building, but toe in, the mentoring side and that advising side?
yeah, good question. I've always loved that the startup community and the entrepreneurial community is kind of built on giving back. So I think that's important. For me, transition to advising, I guess, kind of happened somewhat organically, after I sold my second company, which was All Pause, and started working on some other things. I just naturally started meeting younger entrepreneurs who wanted advice. And originally, I would try to take a call with anybody. That no longer became scalable.
Mm.
So I started writing online, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, which was a bit out of my comfort zone. But
Yeah,
that felt
wait.
like,
That sorry, I gotta dive into this.
okay.
Diving the comfort zone. That's how we met. We met over X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it now. X. Well, respect to you, Elon. Um, ha- I feel like that's another indicator for entrepreneurs is doing the things that are uncomfortable. But how did you, with all of your success, you're still uncomfortable, being in the digital sphere. How, like, what was the transition from the uncomfortable to just getting in there and doing it? Like, was there a mindset shift? Was there like something you saw and you were like, I'm gonna stop being a bitch and I'm just gonna fucking do it? Like, what was that? Like, did you watch the Wall Street movie? What was it?
I love that question. So first of all, you're right. It's X. Elon, please don't put me in Twitter jail. Uh, so I always say momentum breeds momentum. Like most of my last 2 years has been about doing uncomfortable things.
Hmm.
And it's kind of changed my life. And the way it started was with Twitter, with X. At the time, it was Twitter.
Hey.
I wanted to do more advising, and we can go back to that. And I
Oh.
thought best way to do that is build an audience. I mean, I've had Twitter since 2008, but used it. I didn't actively tweet.
Hmm.
Retweeting dog videos. I had 400 followers as
Yeah,
of
wait, so
you know.
you were a founder and you didn't like think about building your personal brand?
I was always behind the scenes. I was never, super comfortable sharing stuff and
Wow.
didn't want to brag. And it just wasn't my thing. I was never despite having done things in social media, I was never a big poster myself. Um, but I recognized that the opportunity to build a personal brand, have a platform was too big to ignore. That was where the world was going. And to your point, it was a way to kind of a one-to-many way to start getting my message out. But I was petrified. It was from the what am I going to write about? You know, what can I say that people are going to be interested in? To, you know, the first time I ever posted anything, I felt like everybody I've ever met in my life, down to my second grade teacher, is going to be analyzing every word I wrote. You know, quite frankly, it was liberating when you kind of realize after a little while that nobody gives a shit.
Wait,
And
she's not looking? She didn't see
turns
my
out,
tweet? What the hell?
turns out most people don't give a shit about you, whether it's on social media or in life in general. The old phrase like, I forget, when you're 30 or 60 or 90, finally you realize they weren't thinking about you at all.
Yeah.
But it took me 3 months of preparing to post my first tweet because I was creating this whole reservoir of content, trying to figure out everything I was going to write about, every story. And then just going back to one of my other important things that entrepreneurs need to do. I did meet, somebody who became a mentor for me, who was very good at this stuff and helped me.
Mm.
And, finally I just pressed send and started tweeting and again realized that most people don't give a shit. And that kind of set me off on a journey. This is going, now as we're in the beginning of 2025, like 2+ years. And it caused me to be far more comfortable posting in group chats when previously, again, I wasn't comfortable posting in group chats because I was like, oh, people are going to so focus on what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Spotlight effect. People care a lot less than you think about, um, than you think they do. And so as a result, once I got into tweeting regularly, I could go into a group chat full of important people and just come up with something, press send, and not obsess over, oh, this person who did this is looking, and just boom, send it. And then I started, like, I hate public speaking. So started doing Twitter Spaces. And I ultimately did one that I saw afterwards had 6,000 people in it, where I was one of the hosts. And I was like, well, first of all, thank fucking God I didn't see that number until afterwards, because it would have terrified me. Yeah, same thing with podcasts. So I just spent a lot of last year doing a lot of spaces, a lot of podcasts, and it made me much more comfortable speaking in public. And then, as someone who's never a big conference person, I started going to more events. I started saying, literally say, if someone invited me to something, and again, I think you have to be really protective over your time. And I say no to a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if someone I know invited me to something where like I'm not going to know anybody, it feels uncomfortable, or normally I would have looked for a reason to say no. It's like, fuck it, say yes. Like,
Mm.
and you learn it's rarely as bad as you think it will be. And it just makes you, each time, it makes the next thing so much easier and less intimidating. And so I really just tried to live the last 2 years of my life just embracing all of those uncomfortable opportunities, right? And there's all these cliches, but that like everything you want lies at the edge of your comfort zone or lies beyond. Well, and to a degree, it's true because there's so many things that have happened to me over the past 2 years that wouldn't have happened if I didn't embrace discomfort, start putting myself out there and taking those shots.
It's almost incredible that you can attribute almost that the courage to dive into something uncomfortable, but then the courage to keep showing up consistently and like looking like a fool or not, no one's really looking, but what perception is looking like a fool. And then building that callus though to, where it's almost
Yeah.
like a fuck it, it doesn't matter. Like Michael Jordan, he's going to shoot the three at the buzzer beater, whether he makes it in or not, it doesn't matter. He wants the ball to shoot it. And that's the point, is like, give him the ball and just keep on keeping on.
Even if he's missed 15 before that, he still wants the ball.
And that's the point. Like, we don't remember all the times that Michael Jordan has missed a shot, but look at his game film. I mean, he's had the ball in his hands plenty of times at the end of the game, and like he's missed. Same with LeBron, same with all these players that we look up to,
Yep.
but you remember, like, oh my God, I remember I think it was game 4, Miami Heat, when Ray Allen was on the team. I remember he drained a three in the corner, and I went,
Yes, yes,
it
yes,
was, it
yes.
was an
Against San
insane.
Antonio.
Oh my gosh. Just like moments like that where it's a complete shift in just the whole trajectory of everything.
Yep.
But it's the
Against
willingness to want it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think right, the people like that, successful founders, they want the ball in the clutch. Like they want to set the agenda, make the tough decisions. They want to live or die based on their own actions. And that's what's, tough about being a founder. But you have it comes down to you. But certain people want that. Like they want that pressure.
And
Um,
oh, you made a good point
I,
about the pressure.
I,
But I
I,
also think too, it's
Wait,
almost
I'm
like,
going to interrupt you.
oh,
Because I'm going to go back
yes.
just to further hammer home your point. Let's go back to where we started. Let's take Juan Soto, or for your benefit as a Yankee fan, we can take Aaron Judge,
Yes.
right? Aaron Judge hits 330, 320, 340, whatever. It still means that he makes out 66, 64, 68 times out of 100, right? As good a hitter as he is. Right.
And
Ted Williams, when he hit 400, it still means that he made out 60 times more versus for every 40 times he got a hit.
that's so true. I mean, you look at it and it's almost like the founders that are willing to put themselves in those uncomfortable positions and keep taking the risks, they know that they're not perfect. On the outside, it looks like, oh shit, they must have all their shit together, that's why they're taking the risk. But to them, it's, they just need the rep. They need that quality rep of the intention of going into it, like, okay, I'm really going to try, I think I have everything together. Oh crap, I don't. Let me go back again to the drawing board, learn what I missed out on or didn't know, and then keep repeating that process. And to the outside, it looks like, oh, it looks like a steady uphill slope, but when you really get the binoculars, it's like, whoop, it's up down, up down. It's a whole path and a whole journey.
I'm going to tell you a funny story. Um, so All Pause, which was the company I started after Snap, which was a pet adoption
I
platform.
was gonna say,
Uh,
I also find that super interesting. You went from like, matching humans to like matching pets, but that's a whole nother side topic.
and someone pointed out to me, I didn't even see this myself, right? Everything I did involved kind of matching to something of something. And that
Mm.
was like the common theme in everything I did. And I didn't even realize that. But I had, when I started All Pause, I brought a girl with me. Her name is Kim from from Snap, and we had worked closely together at Snap. And I remember one day, maybe a few months in, she asked me how things were going, or how I thought things were going. And I said, fair question. You took a leap of faith to come here. I said, sometimes I think we're building a unicorn. Sometimes I think we have a shot at building a successful business. And sometimes I am pretty confident that we're going to run out of money and never make it. And she thanked me for my honesty and said
All at the same time, Kim.
that all makes sense. And I said, by the way, I've had all three of those thoughts this morning. And I'm like, that to me, it totally describes having a startup and being an entrepreneur. It's just a series of highs and lows, and you have to be able to take it. And I think you were going to say something about being a pressure.
Yeah, but I also think it relates being an entrepreneur is just, it's so similar to life. You have these highs and lows in life, and like literally in the same morning or in the same day or even in the same moment, you can have such contradicting thoughts. You're like, wait, I love you, I hate you, but what the heck? You know what I mean? You can literally have a million things going on at the same time. And it's just like, there's so many parallels to business and life. And I think in the world that's like constantly trying to like point out where the division is or where the differences are, it's like, let's just try to find the connections of like where things actually are synergistic and are harmonized, and whether they're in different, industries or different topics or different, areas, but there is interlocking connections to almost everything we do, whether that's, building businesses, meeting new people, it expands beyond that. But to my point about pressure, and before I go on a rant here, I think, pressure is an interesting thing. It goes on like the mindset play. Is pressure a mindset? Because is it self-induced? Like, there's no, like, the air is not filling up with pressure literally because you're walking into it and like the situation is stressful, so like as an entrepreneur and like looking back at, a lot of the things you've navigated through and dealt with, how did you perceive pressure, and like how do you view it now? And what advice maybe would you give to someone that's in the trenches?
Yeah. So as an entrepreneur, I perceive pressure as being ever present. Some, self-induced. I think a lot of founders, especially successful founders, they have a high bar for themselves. So, inherently, they're rarely happy or satisfied with where they are. Um, they also, there's obviously external pressure. Companies running out of money. You just had a big PR hit, and the site or the app crashed, and and there's a million things that can go wrong. I think, well, two things. One, a lot of entrepreneurs, certainly I think I fall into this situation, like thrive under pressure and in a sense need that pressure. Like I need that pressure to perform at my highest levels. Otherwise, I'm kind of relaxed and complacent. So in a way, it's a love-hate thing, but in a way you kind of love the pressure. Don't get me wrong, like being on the verge of running out of money is not a situation I ever would recommend on anybody, but that's not my idea of fun. But in general, like some degree of pressure, I think creates high performance. Probably similar to, as we were discussing, the athlete, the basketball player who wants the ball with 2 seconds left, down two to take that three. But they also have to be able to handle it, right? And I've seen this also, or a lot of entrepreneurs, just especially again, younger entrepreneurs, first-time founders, they get overwhelmed, or they're not. If you're not good with pressure, this is the wrong industry for you, right? Because they start lashing out. Entrepreneurship, being a founder, you're going to be faced with a ton of pressure situations, and you have to have an ability to remain calm and have a steady hand, especially if you have employees, right? They want to see a strong leader. I mean, you can be vulnerable at the right moments, but you have to have an ability to deal in those situations and make decisions with a calm, rational mind. And and a big part of entrepreneurship is making, or being a founder, is making a ton of small decisions with limited and imperfect information. Right? So you have to hone your decision-making skills and be comfortable making calls when, again, going back to my favorite book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, right? I think there's a passage in there that almost every decision you make as a founder, you have 10% of the information that would be available if they subsequently did like a Harvard Business School case
Wow.
study on that decision. So, you have to be comfortable kind of placing your bets and taking your shots, and you can't get paralyzed you know, by fear of picking a path and taking a shot because you're never going to move forward.
Yeah.
So.
One of my pressure to me is a privilege, and then how you handle that is what determines your outcome. But my high school softball coach, he used to say he didn't believe in pressure. His whole concept was pressure's in a tire, and if you're prepared and the opportunity meets preparation, there should be no such thing as pressure. I played softball growing up, and he goes, if pressure is not you going up with the bases loaded, 2 outs with the game on the line. Pressure is if I asked you to go shoot a basketball hoop and you're a softball player with the game on the line, and I asked you to go shoot a 3 and you've never shot a 3 before. That's pressure. And it relates to a lot of the things that we've talked about. It's just like, how are you going to reframe the situation and the circumstance you're in to, best help yourself, and knowing internally how you need to be prepared, or, to deal with a certain situation. And that's really what it comes down to. And it's not one size fits all.
No, and I totally understand what your softball coach was saying. No startup journey is unique. No two startup journeys are unique, right? So I think there's always going to be stuff that comes up that it's impossible to prepare for because
So true.
it's like you've just launched an app, something happens that causes it to blow up, whether it's a feature, you went viral, you got major press. There's really kind of no way to prepare, and I'm not a developer, but there's no way to
You have
prepare
been there.
for. I've been there on the other side of it. There's no way to prepare for like 100,000 users flocking to your product that had 83 users the day before. And like you could try and put in all the infrastructure, but you're not going to see the holes until they emerge.
I love that.
There's just a lot of stuff that comes up because again, you can't. It all unfolds as it goes. So I think it comes down to your ability to stay calm and stay level-headed and make quick decisions with limited information.
I love that. Before I ask you the last question from a fan, I have a question about like the advising and the mentor space. With like in the day that we're living in now, what is it? January 9th, 2025. Holy crap. Can't believe it's 2025.
I know.
What like advice are you seeing or giving to entrepreneurs, founders, whether they're seasoned veterans or, just starting off in the age of endless information, misinformation, AI, and all of this noise? How do you even advise someone to navigate those waters compared to even 3, 5, 10 years ago?
It's a really interesting question. Yeah, as I've gotten more into advising and I'm working with several entrepreneurs right now, it's interesting. As much as there's all of this new information available, it still kind of goes back to that there's no one size fits all, and everybody's journey is unique. One thing I've learned is like, yes, all that information is out there somewhere, but there's really a lot of value to somebody who's been where you're trying to go. And I learned this actually when I was starting to write on X. Someone said like, you have knowledge in your head that you take for granted that's worth a fortune to someone else. And I've seen that, one particular entrepreneur I'm working with now, just a lot of stuff that she's getting started on a new company and kind of going through some of the formation stuff.
Yeah.
Things I know about 83B elections, which is a tax treatment, or how to structure equity grants, or again, stuff that I've done a million times over. And if you haven't done it before, it's scary or intimidating. And like, yes, you can read general advice, but it's not necessarily going to reflect if there's a particular circumstance or whatever. I have a client I've been working with for about a year and a half. She does heirloom jewelry redesign. I know nothing about jewelry. I don't know how to spell jewelry without spell check, but we've been able to grow her revenue literally 10 to 15x
Wow.
in a year and change. Um, and the stuff that comes up with her is it's really just kind of the day to day of, I mean, yes, we've optimized her website, we've grown her TikTok from 2 to 64,000 and all the sexy things. But a lot of it is the unsexy things. It's, okay, where are you getting bogged down? You're getting bogged down in scheduling, people reaching out and scheduling and emails back and forth. Okay, well then let's create a more seamless flow where they book an appointment, they go through a type form to share their information that leads to a Calendly to book their appointment. And then she was getting, as she blew up, a lot of no-shows because she was booked so far in advance. People were
Mm,
booking who had booked 3 months ago, and we realized this is more of an in-the-moment purchase or in-the-moment thing. And right, like you see a video on somebody who can take your heirloom jewelry and redesign it, and then suddenly that call appears on your calendar, like we're in January now, on April 17th. It's like by then it's out of sight, out of mind. So one of the things we just implemented with her was starting to chart. We wanted to test, and it's working, thankfully, charging for booking an initial call. And thankfully now she has the credibility and to be able to get away with it, and it's working. And no one who has paid the booking fee has been a no-show. So, as much as there's all of this information, and I'm a big AI person myself, like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you want, like it's hard to account for the individual circumstances and nuances of a fast evolving business as they come up and the problems that are associated with it. So there's still, at least my experience and the people I'm working with, a lot of value to someone who's done it before and who can kind of come into a business and objectively look at it and identify areas that can be improved, things that are wrong, kind of help you as the client, talk through, figure out like what the blockers are. Um, so that's how I approach it. I don't
yeah.
have some really deep framework. I kind of try to focus on, what really just I'm results driven.
But again, it goes back to there's a certain amount of things that you have to be looking at, but it also goes back to the point of you don't need to have experience in the industry in order to help someone. And I think it's almost more beneficial, almost where you have someone that's more, hindsight's 2020 and not, in the trenches with you, because they're able to provide much more personalized, but also, realistic and advice by just observing what's going on and not having that emotional ties to whatever you're doing.
I think that's absolutely right. And don't get me wrong, like there are certain industries or certain situations where working with someone who has domain expertise is going to matter.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of parts of in the jewelry client I mentioned, her name is Emily, plenty of parts of Emily's business that she's had to explain to me how it works, which might be a little annoying. But with that said, 80% of most businesses, maybe not one size fits all, but are the same regardless of the business, right? Like I am looking at her type form and looking at the drop-off rates for each of the questions and then trying to figure out which one, what we can optimize on each question to improve that drop-off rate. I'm looking at her TikTok that started at 2000 when we wanted to grow quickly. I'm looking at what's performing well, what can be changed, what can be optimized. Like that's the same regardless of the business type, even though I didn't have the slightest clue what a bezel set or prong setting was or whatever. Even now, I don't know if I could describe it if you paid me, but I didn't need to know that to get her the kind of results that I did. And because a lot of business is just business, right? Like whether it was all pause or are you interested or other products I've been on, you're still looking at the same dashboards, the same charts, right? At the time it was Google Analytics, but you're looking at retention, you're looking at the same metrics and trying to optimize them. And a lot of that doesn't change regardless of the business you're in. So,
And I think if anyone's listening, your guy. If you need any help, I'll definitely be talking to you soon, Darrell. We're
all
launching
right.
we're launching a couple things that I need some help on, which is interesting. Before we wrap up, I do have a question for you from a fan.
All right. I have
Woo.
fans. Awesome.
Woo! Okay, so let me read it. So he's starting a sports startup that focuses on helping athletes connect their mind and their body. He's currently offering sports training for football and lacrosse, and he also offers mental health tools like breathwork, meditation, and yoga that's integrated in the training sessions. Right now, he's currently doing nothing on social. What would you recommend he do to generate and attract more of his target audience? He is in New Jersey, but I've talked to him a little bit, and I think it could be almost like a digital business model also, and like offering some of the things that he's offering. So just not knowing too much, what advice would you give to someone like that just starting off?
I think it's the same advice I would give to really anybody who wants to start a business. It's validate your ideas first. Talk to customers, talk to potential customers, find out their needs, find out their hopes, their dreams, their goals, and then turn around and sell it to them. But really, my strong advice always is validate before building. And in this case, so another book recommendation, great book on talking to users and doing customer interviews. It's called The Mom Test.
Ooh.
And the premise is, because a lot of people, when they have a business idea, right, they'll ask their friends, they'll be like, hey, I have this idea. Like, what do you think of it? And friends are, predisposed to please. To be like, oh, that sounds really cool. Like that gives you absolutely no information as to whether they would actually buy, right? Like what you want is indications of intent that someone would buy a product.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's ways to do that. And with customer interviews, the biggest way is ask open-ended questions. And it's not, hey, here's let's use podcasting, right? You
Mm-hmm.
wanted to start a marketplace to buy or sell podcasts. Let's say I wanted to start a marketplace to buy podcasts, right? The wrong way to do it would be like, hey, this growing podcast, if I created a marketplace for you to sell your podcast when you were ready, would that be interesting to you? You'd probably be like, yeah, sure, of course. What I would say to you instead is, Taylor, have you ever thought about your ultimate goals with this podcast? Have you ever thought about selling your podcast? If you did, how would you go about it? What's the first place you would look? Who's the first person you would talk to? Why? And start to get all that information. So it's more understanding. It's not saying, here's my product, what do you think? It's understanding their life, their thought process. And that allows you to you do a bunch of those, you start to see common problems. Like, maybe I interview 20 podcasters and they all say, I don't have the slightest idea who to call. Or like they all say, oh, well, I know there's this one place to call, but there's issues with that. Whatever it is, it's just asking those open-ended questions rather than like the idea is almost irrelevant. You're just trying to understand their world, their problems, their biggest pain points. And then taking that a step further, this kind of circles back to my money Twitter background, right? Like, let's say you do have a list of people you can basically pre-sell an idea to them, right? Like you've gotten a list of things, pain points, you've come up with a list of potential products. Start building a list. Content strategy is a separate discussion, but let's say you start building up your social or your email list, or you have a newsletter, right? Newsletter is an even better way to start building a list. And you could do it as something as simple as a survey. Be like, I'm thinking of launching 5 different products. Let me know. Reply, yes, I'd buy this. Or, here's a product I'm thinking of launching. Or here's a product I'm going to launch. Reply, yes, I'd buy this. Or yes, I'm interested. And if enough people reply, yes, I'd buy this, then you go build it. And if they don't, then you don't, and you've avoided wasting a ton of time. So it's kind of like build it once find out what the pain points are and what the demand is, and then validate that people are willing to pay for that. And once they are, then you go build it.
And then I think, even to drive your point home, when you do figure out even what those pain points are, and you're actually building it and you're in the trenches, keep asking those questions, because it could continuously keep, guiding you into your ultimate thing that you end up on, right? And it's like a
100%.
never ending journey almost of asking questions and being curious, back to, where we originally started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question. What are you
Wait,
most
do I have more fans?
You have a bunch, Darrell. I mean, we have a laundry list here. Do you want me to
All
read
right.
everyone? I mean, we're gonna have to do podcasts every day for the next year.
I mean, like I said, we all have a little bit of an ego. So if it's fan mail,
Hey, send it in.
okay,
Anyone have
go.
fan mail for Darrell? I'll ask them for you, anonymously or not. You let me know. No, for real. The last question: is there anything that you're like looking forward to for 2025 that's on your horizon, that's exciting you or moving you in a different direction that you haven't felt before in a while?
Good question. 2025, advising is going to remain a part of my life because I love it, and I kind of come to the realization that I'm pretty good at it. So as long as the client is right and the opportunity is right, I think I'm working on something with influencers. I have a personal branding agency. With that said, I'm always looking to do new things. And if I can just tell a quick story, going back to the putting yourself out there, the old Steve Jobs quote of, the dots only connect themselves looking backward. You can't connect the dots looking forward.
Mm.
So me being on Twitter led to a conversation with someone pretty prominent on Twitter and social media, who at the end of that conversation, and we were discussing, we connected over post-exit life. And he put me at the end of the call into this post-exit founders group that I mentioned. Right.
Wow.
He said, this is the best group I've ever been a part of. I think you should join it. And it is a phenomenal community. Through that community, I have met a number of people, and people I've come to know as friends, potential business partners, and one person, for instance, that I connected with last year. We had a bunch of calls and went really well. And she's like, we should do like a founder dinner series. And my original response was, I don't really throw dinner. Like, no. Yes, we should. Yes, we should. So we're planning to move forward with that, hopefully in the first quarter of 2025, put together like a core group of founders and build a community around it, a WhatsApp group, and not grow it into something massive, but just literally like awesome people that we wish we could see and be in touch with more often. And I'm still brainstorming business ideas with people from this post-exit founders group. And the interesting thing is, I've had some of these incredible people come into my life and new opportunities come into my life as a result of this group, which I can trace back to starting to post on Twitter in early 2023. And it's just really wild when you connect the dots looking backward. So much happened. Again, circling back to where we were before, just getting out of my comfort zone, starting to do uncomfortable things. And it's led to some wild things. So yeah, I would say doing things with people from that group, doing a founder dinner series, hopefully finding something else really interesting to work on in the midst of all my other stuff, and maybe a couple of more cool advising clients.
I love
that's what's exciting me, hopefully, for 2025.
Woo. Wait, I have one more burning question, and I'm sorry,
All
I
right.
swear. This is the last one, I promise.
All right. Lay it on me.
What advice would you give to your younger self? Like before you really started the entrepreneurial journey? Like you were dabbling in it at a young age and you were doing it. It was serious, but like before you actually committed to it as your full-time job.
Um, Look, I can give you the obvious answers of, do uncomfortable things, right? But I think the biggest thing I took for granted at a young age was the power of having a strong network. I think
Mm,
magic in life happens when you can get yourself into rooms that most people can't get into.
mm,
Uh, and for a long time, obviously personal branding wasn't a thing back in the beginning of my journey, back before I had a few gray hairs. But I didn't value, I hate the term networking because it sounds transactional, but
yes.
building a network and building strong relationships with, great people, important people, successful people, etc. Because again, especially nowadays, like the action happens in large group chats. It happens in private communities. This post-exit founders, there's others like that. Um,
Mhm.
that's where all the action is happening. And I was a little late on the scene for some of these things. And it's only in the past several years that I've really made that a focus. It's easy for people to forget about you. When I
Mm,
sold All Pause for a hot minute, I was hot shit and everyone wanted to meet with me. And I kind of went dark for a while and to decompress. And I remember when I finally came up for air and I was like, all right, guys, I'm ready to do something. Let's talk, let's meet. No one gave a shit anymore. Like that was yesterday's news. And it just really kind of reminded me that, okay, just because you did something big, a year ago, 2 years from ago, if you're not continuing to manage those
mm.
relationships and build upon them, out of sight, out of mind. So I can't emphasize this enough for people. Just being able to get into rooms that other people can't get into is really it's a hack in business. It's a hack in life. Um, it's a game changer.
That's a whole rabbit hole, but we'll leave that there. Darrell, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you. So excited for everyone to hear this. And Darrell, where can people find you?
They can find me on X at at Darrell Lerner. LinkedIn is same thing at Darrell Lerner. Instagram is dlerner2112. And probably more importantly, if they're interested in reading more about my advising and seeing some testimonials, my website is darrelllerner.com, DARRELLLERNER, three L's in the middle. So any of those places work.
So if you really want to get in touch with Darrell, reach out to him on every one of those platforms. Okay, everyone.
And I got like 40 followers on TikTok and I posted once. So you're welcome
TikTok,
to join.
TikTok.
You're welcome to join me there too.
I love that. Thank you.